Hi guys, we'll just get a couple minutes here, just get people logged in. So we'll just kind of wait here for a couple minutes. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send comments through as well as I'm going through. I'll try and answer as best as I can. I'll give about one more minute here for people to get in there. Okay, I'll get started. So I'll give everybody a story about how I started into the dog profession. I think it's important so that people kind of have a backstory. So I started doing dog training about 10 years ago now. I started into it because we had a Staffordshire Bull Terrier who had some pretty severe behavior issues with fear aggression. So we had done basically everything right with our first dog and done everything wrong with our second dog. Our first one we got from reputable breeders who bred like specifically for temperament. And when we got him, he was lovely. His name's Harvey. So about a year later, we decided we would get another one. And so when we got him, he came from a breeder that we had found on Kijiji. And he ended up being from a home who did not have a whole lot of knowledge on the breed. So we kind of should have taken some of those red flags at the time, but we decided we would bring him home. And so we started taking him to a doggy daycare because me and my husband were both working at the time. So we wanted to make sure he had lots of socialization. So we started taking him to a daycare that was close to our house. And he seemed to be doing really well. He did really well at home. He picked things up very quickly. Had no issues on leash, had no issues off leash, had great impulse control. So when he was about 6 months, they'd kind of mentioned that something had happened while he was in daycare, but they didn't really elaborate too much on um, what had happened. So we didn't really think it was too big of a deal. So the next time that we went to take him in, he didn't really want to go in. So we knew that it was a little bit more than what they had made it out to be. And actually, even years later, I had met somebody who had worked at the facility at the time and was actually surprised to still see Moses around. So anyways, we had noticed that he went from this dog who was great with other dogs and had no issues to when we would walk him down the alleyway, if he would have dogs barking at him, he would start to get really nervous. His ears would go down, his tail would tuck, he would start to tremble, and then that progressively got worse to the point where he would bark and growl and lunge back. And then a couple of months of doing that and it progressing so far, we had kind of become the typical 20 something with an aggressive pit bull and just fit the typical stereotype. So it was exactly what we didn't want to do. So we had contacted somebody local in town who did aggressive dogs class. And the first thing she told us to do was to get a choke chain. And so at the time, we didn't really feel comfortable about doing that, but we thought we are way in over our head and this is a professional. So we decided we would try it. And so going into the class, she was telling us to do things like step on his feet and yank on the chain, and if he lunges towards another dog, to yank him back. And what we were finding was it was a very traumatic experience for him. It was pretty traumatic for us as well. And so we ended up leaving that class after, repeated requests saying there's something else going on here. What else can we do? And her having no other suggestions for us. Um, so we ended up finding somebody in Edmonton who's about an hour and a half away from us, who came down and introduced us to what fear aggression was. So again, at the time, we had no idea what that was. So he introduced us to fear aggression and was teaching how we could still use positive reinforcement with him without having to use the choke chains and those types of things. And so within 5 minutes, he had a completely different response from him, which was amazing for us to see. And it really showed us that those aversive things were not necessary. And so we had continued with our training with him. And at the time, I was 19. So at the time, I was looking for what I wanted to do for work. And I actually always wanted to be a vet. But at the time, I didn't want to go to school and be away from my family, for one, and two, have a whole bunch of student debt that I wasn't able to pay off at the time. So I always wanted to be a vet, but found out that there was a high number of dogs euthanized because of behavior issues. And at the time, again, around where I live, there wasn't a whole lot available out there for people that were in a situation like mine. So I decided that maybe going down the behavior route was a good option for me. And the person that I had come down for training was offering to do a course doing what he was doing. Um, so I thought maybe that would be a good route for me to go. So about 2.5 years studying dog psychology and doing everything I could for training. So we did our training through the Edmonton Humane Society. I would shadow him. Then I worked on the side. I would walk dogs. I would babysit dogs. I would house sit while people went away for holidays. I would rollerblade dogs on my lunch while I was working my other job, um, until I had finished my diploma. And then I started working professionally on my own. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. With Moses, so he was our behaviorally challenged dog. With Moses, he was a pretty severe case. He was a management dog, a life management. And so he, in his worst state, could hardly even go outside anymore. To bring out his leash and his harness, telling him that we were going to be going out for a walk, he would panic. His eyes would go bloodshot. His eyes would dilate. He'd be trembling. He'd be pacing around the house. He would just escalate to like level 100 without anything even happening yet. Just in that anticipation of being around something scary. And so in his worst case, it took us about 45 minutes to walk around our block, which should maybe take 5 minutes. But in order to get him to kind of settle and calm himself and do what he needed to do properly, it would take that long. So as he progressed through, he got to the point where he could walk down the street. He could be around kids. He could be around people he didn't know, around other dogs. Um, and his tail would be kind of mid-level. His ears would be, nice and loose. His body wouldn't be stressed. So he got to the point where he, had made those steps to be less stressed in those triggering environments. And so looking back at the training that we were initially given, I see all the stress signals that were there. And what was really funny is she had no mention of anything like that for us to read body language, for us to read those stress signals, and even how to manage those situations when they get stressed like that. So what I do now is I teach people a lot about body language and stress signals and how that has an effect on how you're managing your situations with your dog. Um, so my biggest thing that I put out to clients is I teach them about, again, body language and stress signals. And the reason why I feel like that is so important is the general public does not know how to read body language, and which makes it a huge issue for um, communication and miscommunication. So we see something that the dog is doing and then we don't respond appropriately, and then the dog ends up having to level up on their stress responses to try and get their point across. So um, I put a big focus on that, and even just educating people on that, I find has a huge effect on just how they perceive some of these situations. A lot of the time that we go into them, we have this view on how dogs are supposed to react or how they're supposed to behave, and we put these expectations on them without them even knowing what we want them to do. And they're very clear a majority of the time on how they feel in those situations. But again, we don't know what things to look for. And stress in itself is not always good, obviously, but it's not always bad. It gives us a good indication that we can use it for motivation. We can use it for them to perform. They want to use it to get resources. So, in the long run, it does have a purpose there, and it does have an effect on how we can utilize it. But when they get past their threshold points, where they no longer can learn anything and we no longer can work with them or redirect them, then we get really frustrated and they get really confused and frustrated as well. So if we can kind of keep them at those mid levels or under, then again, we're going to have a much better time being able to manipulate those situations. Um, so that's a little bit about how I work with clients. Again, one of the things that I used to do when I would go out and be walking dogs or kind of initially working with them, one of the tricks that I used to do, and I don't recommend this for somebody who is not knowledgeable or not experienced, but what I used to do is I would put headphones on. And what it would do is it would force me to really watch their body language, and I was very hyper aware of everything that was going on, although I was very careful not to translate that to the dogs. But what I would do is I would watch their body language, and I would watch how that body language would either increase or decrease as we would move around different triggers, around different sounds, those types of things. So it gave me a um, good experience on being able to watch those things and really hyper focus on the very subtle changes that they make in their body language, whether it's different ear flicks or different tail positions, even how they walk, and how fast they walk, how they slow down, very subtle things that they would do. And it gave me a really good experience on being able to recognize those things. So um, but again, I don't recommend that for somebody who is maybe moving into a situation where they're not aware of the surroundings that are going on or are not experienced on, what to do when those things happen. We want to just make sure that we keep you and your dog safe. But again, for me, it was a good way to get that experience. So as far as the body language and stress signals that are really common out there. So one of the most commonly ones that I see with dogs, I run puppy classes and I run um, group classes for adults as well. And so what I see a lot of the time is this back and forth conversation between dogs and puppies. And so that is kind of the normal way that it should be. And so the common signals that we see that cause issues a lot of the time can again be miscommunicated with humans. So one of the common ones that I see come up that cause a lot of issues is when hackles go up. So hackles going up in itself is not necessarily an aggressive type of response. But the problem with hackles is that is a higher level of excitement for the dogs. And so when dogs are in high levels of excitement or high levels of stress, it's really easy for them to flip over into more of an aggressive response or something where it's too much. And then again, just progresses from there. So that's one thing that I see a lot with puppies. It's one thing I see a lot with dogs, especially going to the dog park. And so what we've seen as humans is people see that and they kind of immediately respond to it. And that's not always the way that we need to do that. If we start to see some of these things, with stress signals, when we start looking and being able to recognize them, it's not always something that we have to respond to. Low levels of stress just give us an indication of where they are. When they start to show multiple stress signals, or higher levels of stress, then that's probably where we're going to want to respond. But again, being able to recognize those few things here and there. So if they start to lip lick, if they are head turning away, if they are positioning their body to the side or moving their position from a higher level to a lower level, so standing to a sitting position or sitting to a laying position or full on show my belly. So anything where they're, trying to go into those full on submits, then yeah, we probably want to interject there a little bit to give them some assistance. Um, and this is for both humans and for dogs. So a lot of the time, people see dogs roll over and show their belly, and the first thing they want to do is go and pet them. But we always have to look at the full context of their body language. So a rollover show my belly for pets versus a rollover for submission, you're going to see a few differences there. So submissive side, what you're going to see is a stiffer body. Sometimes you'll see the tail tuck under. Sometimes you'll see the ears pressed back. A lot of the time you see lip licks. And whale eye, which is when you can see the white in the eye. So you're going to see a multitude of other things go along with that. And when they're in that more submissive side, approaching them is actually only going to make them feel more uncomfortable. So if you have a puppy or a dog who goes into the more attention seeking type submission, show my belly, then what you're going to see is, a more loose body. They're going to be more interactive with you. You might see like a midline tail wag and they kind of wiggle around a little bit. So those are the type of differences. In itself may look like the same thing, but a completely different response that you're going to want to have out of those two different situations. So again, what you find a lot of the time that these miscommunications are really common within households because we're in these enclosed spaces. We don't have a whole lot of options for our dogs to move around. So typically we see those escalations happen fairly quickly. So, hallways, entranceways, small rooms can definitely make dogs feel more uncomfortable because they don't have the option to move out of those situations. Same thing when a dog is on a leash. Some dogs are really great off a leash, but as soon as you throw them on a leash, they're more reactive because, again, they don't have the option to move away. So, we typically see things like a tighter body, ears very alert, tail can go really high and stiff. And even if it's wagging, doesn't necessarily mean that they're really happy to be in that situation. So, again, we just want to make sure that we are aware of what things to watch for and which things are maybe telling us, okay, we need to get our dog out of these situations. So, I work off of a stress signal list that I teach people. So I kind of give them different categories on the way stress signals work. Because again, trying to pick out one specific signal is not always going to work in your favor because they fit in more than one category of what type of stress they're trying to give off. So I teach people about stress signals in themselves. Then we have different things for calming signals. So those are things that are either trying to calm themselves down or offer to the person or the dog saying, hey, I don't want to take this any further. I'm not trying to be a threat. Then we have signals that say like, okay, you need to move away from me now and I want my space, or invitations for interaction. And then we have another category called displacement behaviors. And so displacement behaviors we'll see really commonly with dogs where they're maybe not overly socialized or maybe have a lot of triggers around. And so what it is it's behaviors where they are trying to change the situation, but the signals that they're giving off don't really fit the context for what's going on. So these are really common, but they're also really commonly missed. So one of the most common ones that you'll see dogs do are stress yawns. So what you find is it's not after they've just woken up from a sleep. It's when they've had some type of interaction or have somebody approaching them or something is in the situation is setting them off. So what you'll see is they'll just do a quick little yawn. Um, then we have something like teeth chattering. So when they kind of just shiver their teeth a little bit. Same thing with penis crowning. So obviously only effective for males, but what it is a higher level of stress. So it gives a good indication where they're around a resource of some kind. So food or high level play or mates or something like that. Um, and even if this is not something that your dogs do, it's always nice to be able to recognize these in other dogs so that if somebody comes up to you and says, oh, my dog is friendly, and you start to see some of these signals coming out or see them kind of escalating some of the stress, then you kind of get to the idea where, okay, maybe I should move my dog out of this situation. So, lip licking is again one of the most common ones, but it's really subtle. So a lot of the time it gets missed. Very, very common though. Stress vocalization, which is pretty easy for people to recognize. So again, anything between like a whine to a growl to a bark to sometimes dogs will make like a puffing sound with their lips. So they kind of just puff their lips out and make a little bit of a sound. Um, Sometimes they have decreased appetite. So if you have a really food motivated dog who's no longer taking treats, it's a good indication that they are over threshold. So their digestion ends up shutting down because they go into that fight or flight mode. So they will no longer take treats. So if you have a treat motivated dog who will no longer look at the treats or take the treats anymore, then it's a good indication for you that you need to move the dog away further from what the distraction or the trigger is, or you just need to move them completely out of the situation and let them calm down. Um, Different things like whale eye. So again, when you can see the white of the eye, urination, defecation, or anal sac expression. So again, visceral response from their body where they can't control what's going on. Ears pinned back, so pressed right down. Frozen body posture or slow movement. So again, you might be on a walk where the dog starts to see a trigger and then starts to slow down in their walk and look a little more methodical with it. Something like that. Pacing, where they try to escape or they try and hide behind things. Those are all stress signals as well. Panting, increased heart rate, increased respiration, those tucked or low tails. Um, Stiffening their body posture, trembling, excessive shedding, or sometimes they'll go into it looks like a fake stretch. So again, they kind of just stretch their legs out or stretch their back legs out, but it doesn't look like a full on stretch. Muscle ridges around the mouth, around the brow, or around the eyes. Difficult to see in dogs that have long hair, but shorter hair, much easier to see. Urogenital checkout, so they go and sniff at themselves or lick at themselves. And so this is males and females, doesn't matter. Excessive salivation, so drooling all over the place, hypervigilance or hyperalertness when they kind of shift their weight around, self-grooming to the point where they cause sores, increased reactivity. So I talk about this one with trigger stacking. So trigger stacking is when something will kind of stress them out at level 1, but they don't react to it. And then something else comes and it stresses them out, but they don't react. And then after 3 or 4 of those, they get to the point that now they react. So any one of those would be okay, but because all of them happened back to back and they've gone up this step ladder, that's what sets them off. And then once they're up there, they have that increased reactivity. So then it takes much less things to set them off or much less for them to get to that point of reacting. So those I think is really important because again, what happens is people take their dogs out or start working with them and they kind of, get over this first hurdle and then they think the dog is, totally fine. And so again, what has happened is they've kind of gone up this step ladder and now they've stayed up there. And so I used to have a client who their dog would be in that increased reactivity for almost an entire week. So if they had some type of for the dog, a traumatic experience. So for him, it was specifically things like he was really sensitive about his feet. So if you had to clean his feet, if you had to clean his eyes or clean around his bum for about the next week, he was a really high bite risk for them. And it would be like minuscule things that would set him off. So he was a really good candidate for pharmaceutical intervention. And so again, what that did for him was it gave them the ability to bring him down to a level where behavior modification was still possible. So when they end up getting up so high and stay there all the time, then it makes that behavior modification really difficult to do because they're never able to get to the point where they can retain that information because they're just always in that fight or flight mode. So if we can bring them down enough to a level where we can do the behavior modification, then again, you're going to be able to start to see those results come out of it. But again, just giving them pharmaceuticals isn't going to change the situation. We need to do a combination of both. So he was a good candidate for that, and they were able to wean him off the medication as well. But that's just a good indication of how that increased reactivity can happen for an extended period of time. Sometimes it's 5 minutes where they can come down. Sometimes it's an hour or two, and then again we get to some of these cases where it's a week's time before things can get consistent for them again. So our calming or appeasement signals. So again, the things that dogs offer to say like, hey, I don't want to take this any further, or I'm trying to submit a little bit. So lookaways are the most common ones that dogs do. I commonly do this with dogs a lot of the time too, where I just kind of turn my face off to the side. A lot of the time, they just kind of come and lick at your face. Even very currently, I've been having to wear masks when I go into people's homes, just with all the COVID stuff going on. So when I go in and meet them, the first thing they do is try and get up under my mask. So I just turn my head off to the side, just giving an indication that I'm not really into them licking at me. Paw raises is another one that you'll see. So when a dog is being sniffed, one of their front paws will come up a little bit. So again, just that a calming or appeasement signal. Sniffing, so they kind of just sniff at the air, sniff at the ground. Sneezing, so this actually means that they enjoy what's going on. My dog Harvey does this quite a bit. He does this when we're getting ready to play or ready to go for a walk or getting us food ready. It's not really a real sneeze, it's just kind of a fake one. Scratching out of context, lowering their body posture, so again, moving from that standing position to a sitting position to laying down to, again, roll over, show my belly. Blinking. So we see this one really commonly with dogs on like YouTube videos or videos that we see on social media. So typically the response is dog has gotten into the garbage or peed on the floor. Owner comes in and starts videotaping and says, "What did you do?" And so you see the dog kind of go into this like squinting, excessively blinking type situation. So very, very clear that the dog is trying to be submissive. So that's a good one to watch for. Shake-offs, yawning, lip and nose licking, sitting or laying down, and then moving in an arc on an approach. So when dogs screech, you'll see very commonly that they will kind of arc around, which is why you'll see them like go for the bum rather than right up at the face. So moving in that arc around is a much more polite way of doing that approach. Those rush approaches forward can be deemed very rude or very aggressive. So lots of dogs don't like those. Are signals that say that we want some space from the dogs. So territory marking, hard eyes, which is when you can see clear distinction between the iris and the pupil. Teeth showing, so there's different stages of teeth showing. So we have things where, so C shape, which is when you can see all the teeth just at the front or just at the side. So each of those kind of levels down as you go through them. Ears alert and forward, muzzle bumping, tense body or tense face, heightening their body posture. So going from a laying position to sitting up to standing up to puffing out that chest to actually trying to jump on top of something. So again, just making themselves look bigger, lowering their head or neck. So a lot of the time this is around something where the dog is being approached, or they have a resource of some kind that they want to protect, and they kind of just do one of those. um, so excessive barking, and usually you'll find it in a very low and fast sounding bark. And when you get used to listening to your dog, you're going to hear a big difference between those alert barks versus those initiations for play, and those things where they're trying to elicit for some type of item. So whether they need to go outside, or they want food, or they want attention of some kind. So you're going to be able to start seeing those variations in their bark, but typically that like really low and fast sound, and really common when you walk down an alleyway or walk where dogs are in a yard, you'll kind of hear that like really low and fast sounding bark. Piloerection, so again, when those hackles go up or that hair stands up, and again, in itself, though, is not aggressive. Tail position, so when it's really high and stiff. And again, we have to be really careful with this one because it'll be different for different dogs. So dogs that have a really curly tail, typically the curlier it gets, the tighter their body is. Whereas with some dogs, it just has to go up straight. With Harvey, what ends up happening is if his tail is up straight, it's okay. I know that I can recall him out if I need to. But as soon as he gets a little bit of a crick in the end of his tail, I know that he's really, really stiff. And I need to either go and be a little bit more in his face to get him to redirect me, or I need to go and just like physically remove him from the situation. Ground scratching, frozen body posture, brief lookaways, and whale eye all fit in this category as well. But one of the things that we want to note is when your dog is doing these signals, we don't want to actually punish those situations. What we want to do is take note that they are very clearly saying that they feel uncomfortable, and that these are situations that we need to do something for them. So we don't actually want to punish those signals that they're giving us because they're warning systems. So as soon as we start to punish them, what we find is we start suppressing their behaviors. And so their underlying emotional state hasn't changed in that situation. They feel just as uncomfortable, but that warning system has gone away. So now we're not able to kind of see when we actually need to interject ourselves or when we shouldn't. So again, we want to be really careful that we don't actually punish a growl or something like that, because again, the dog is very clearly trying to say that they feel uncomfortable. What we want to do is target those situations and be able to start doing those behavior modification exercises in whatever case it is, and be able to help them feel more comfortable with what's going on, or just know how to limit their exposure to those triggers so that we can manage the situations better. One of the ones that also fits in this category that I find is very commonly missed is called a kiss to dismiss. So a kiss to dismiss is a very gentle and polite way of them just kind of licking at us. And it's just their way of saying no thank you. And I think the issue with a lot of these signals is we just pick out one thing and kind of focus on that, whereas we need to take a full body context of the situation and full body context of what they're trying to communicate. So licking in itself is not a move away from me cue, but when you look at the rest of the body language, if their body is tight, if they're trying to look away, if they're lip licking, giving you whale eye. So, giving some of those other signals saying, I don't really feel comfortable in what's going on, then that lick in itself is again telling you that they want you to stop. So Harvey, who has beautiful behavior and it's very direct for me, he does not like his back legs being touched. So if you kind of pet down his back and like move towards where his leg is, the first couple times that you kind of pet down his leg, what he'll do is just kind of very gently lick at your hand. And again, he gives off lots of other signals as well. So again, he usually head turns, he lip licks. something like that. So if you continue after he's lip licked, his next stage up is to very gently but very directly you put his teeth on your hand. So again, he doesn't bite, but he just very gently puts his teeth over your hand to, again, give you that signal that says, I do not want you to do this. So I don't know if it's a pain issue or just something that he doesn't feel comfortable with, but anyways, that's kind of his way of giving that kiss to dismiss. And then if you don't recognize those signals, then they go up to the next level. So again, we want to make sure that we don't punish those things because we don't want them to just go automatically to stage number 2. We want to be aware of that. We basically just want to be able to respect their space and respect what boundaries that they have, and know, again, what situations that we need to work with them with. So our signals that we actually want our interactions with, so where they're trying to initiate with us or enjoy what's going on. So play bows are one of the most recognized signals. So when their bum goes up in the air, or they kind of do a play dance where they kind of just bounce around a little bit. So those types of things are trying to initiate in the play. The easy wagging tail, so you'll kind of see it as a midline tail. It's not really an overly fast or stiffness to it. It's just kind of that easy wag, or windmill tail, so it kind of just goes around in a circle. Flicking of their tongue, so they kind of just have a little flick at the end of their tongue. A submissive grin, and this can even be to the point where they end up showing their teeth. So showing teeth and nice loose body, not an aggressive type of signal. But if you have showing your teeth and stiff body and ears are forward and tail is up really really high, then yeah, that's probably a move away from EQ. So same thing with rollovers. So rollovers, again, more submissive side, that tight body, tail tucked under, ears back, whale eye. Don't approach the dog because they're trying to give you those signals that they're feeling uncomfortable. But if they have that nice loose body, then they're trying to engage with you. We have licking. So again, licking more for affection, or trying to initiate that contact, then yeah, totally okay to interact with them. Relaxed body posture. So again, nice loose body, and then soft eyes, which is typically what dogs are in a majority of the time. And then we have our final category, which is those displacement behaviors. So displacement behaviors, again, are the ones that don't really fit the context of what's going on in the situation. The dogs want things to change, but they're not quite sure what to do. So they kind of just do something. So territory marking can be one. Inappropriate increase in activities. So this is commonly known as zoomies. So zoomies happen for several different reasons. So it's not, again, just the one thing. But if it kind of doesn't fit for what's going on, then again, that would probably fit in your displacement category. Stretching, shake-offs, sniffing, lookaways, or again, showing those teeth or doing their smile where they kind of pull the lips back. So again, any of those would fit in this category as well. Abnormal behaviors, ritualized behaviors, chasing their tails, things like that. Ball obsessive dogs, so if they're not quite sure how to interact, a lot of the time they'll go and grab a ball and kind of like get some type of interaction so that they can do something and focus on that. Behavior sequences, aggressive behaviors, or abnormal behaviors, those would fit in this category as well. So I call this the fun police. So fun police is when dogs want to control the situation, but they're not quite sure what else to do. So they kind of just go in and start barking at other dogs. They try and pin them down. They try and mount on top of them. But again, doesn't really fit for what's going on. So I see this one a lot at the dog park. So typical situation is 2 dogs will be playing at the dog park. Third dog enters in, and sees lots of excitement going on. So the first thing they do is go and take off after these other 2 dogs playing, and they try and bark at it. They growl at them. They take one of the dogs and try and pin it down. So again, what they're doing is trying to change that situation, trying to control it, but it doesn't really fit for what's going on. So again, when you start to see some of these behaviors come out, then we want to give the dogs different options. So if you know that your dog is prone to doing that, then those are the situations where you want to keep your dog on a leash before you release it off. You want to make sure that you have really good recall so that you can get the dog directed back. So again, having those really base and really important skills built up to the point where you have those right on par for those triggers, that you can rely on those. So sit and down and high five and speak. Look cues, so getting them to focus on you, and then the recall type stuff. So again, when we can get those skills trained up really well, we're able to manage these situations for them because we give them something else to focus on. So when we have stress signals, um, once you kind of get familiar with how to watch for them, and what I find with clients is they get really excited because they can kind of pick things out and say, oh yeah, I seen this one, and oh yeah, I saw another one. So when they start getting comfortable being able to recognize them, then we can get to the point of being able to control some of these situations a little bit better. So when you see one signal here and one signal there, and they're kind of at that really low level, then there's not really a whole lot that you need to do about the situation. But when you get to the point where they're giving you multitudes of stress signals, or they're increasing in their stress level, then we want to be able to control that, just so that we can manage it for them. Because again, once they get past that threshold of stress, then it gets really difficult for them to control themselves and have that impulse control. Or for us to be able to redirect them. So if we can keep them at that midline or lower, then we have a much easier time redirecting when we need to. So having our sit and look and stay, what we can do is periodically use those types of things as we're working with them. So if we're taking them for a walk and your dog is typically overly excited, or sees something and gets really excited as soon as it comes around the corner, then periodically as you're walking through, get them to stop and get them to focus and get them to do either their sits or high fives, and then, okay, let's go. So again, you're just getting their brain to refocus rather than having all this other stuff flood in on them. And then same thing when you actually start working with triggers. So with dog reactive dogs, as you're approaching towards, if we can kind of see where those low level triggers are, and again can keep them at the point where we can manage that, then again we can use these things to again refocus their brain. So what we end up doing is kind of have a combination where we're walking towards, walking away, walking towards, again getting a little bit closer, and then walking away, again just kind of getting within wherever that boundary is for them. And then same thing when we get to the point of having more unknown triggers. So when you have, say, a dog who reacts to, say, certain noises, so thunderstorms, or maybe they take off after a deer or a rabbit when they see it, then those are a little bit more on the unknown side. So what we end up having to do is be able to train those triggers, so that we can manage those situations. But again, if we put them in those high levels of stress and haven't managed it at those lower levels, then we're going to have a really difficult time being able to redirect them at all. So with any of these stress signals, again, we don't always have to do something about it, but it just gives them a good indication that they're trying to communicate with us, that we want to be aware of what that communication is so that we can respond appropriately. And again, I find the biggest issue is that there's just that miscommunication on what the dogs are trying to say and then what we want from them. So when we can give them those signals, and give them that direction ahead of time, or again, when we're in that lower level, we're going to have a much easier time being able to redirect, and being able to get the responses that we want out of the dog, and kind of go from there. So, one of the things that we'll see as trainers is we have dogs that bite out of nowhere, as one of the things that we hear a lot. But I can almost guarantee you that majority of the time the dog did not bite out of nowhere, that they had given off several signals saying that they had felt uncomfortable or that there was some type of trigger there for them. But we have just missed what they've tried to communicate to us. So again, those really subtle signals like looking away and giving whale eye, dilated pupils, when they've got bloodshot eyes, So things where, if you're not specifically looking for it, then you're not going to see it. Most people, when they hear a growl, they, kind of know what that means. But with those more subtle things, again, the general public doesn't know how to watch for those things. So if we can kind of get more of this information out there on being able to know what things to watch for, we're going to see those bite incidences decrease, and these situations where dogs are left to be out of control, we're going to be able to see those situations decrease as well. So if anyone has any questions on anything, I will kind of watch here for a little bit and try and answer any questions that there are. Other than that, I appreciate everybody that's sat here and listened to me. So I hope everybody enjoys all the rest of the stuff that is in this conference here. I've had a great time being able to share the knowledge that I have. So thank you all for coming.